Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing a recent Supreme Court decision, Dixon and Vuntut Gwitchin First Nation, and the question of whether the Charter applies to Indigenous self-governments. Now, in this case, the main question revolved around a section of our Charter that Canadians, some of them might not be familiar with, and there is case law about this section, but it's limited, and it's Section 25. Josh, what is Section 25 of the Charter, and how was it being used in this case?
So, Section 25 of the Charter says that the guarantees in the Charter of certain rights and freedoms, so things like your equality rights or your expression rights, shall not be construed so as to abrogate or derogate from any Aboriginal, treaty, or other rights or freedoms that pertain to Aboriginal peoples. And it's one of a number of rights that come sort of at the end of the charter, and they seem to help tell us something about how to interpret those things like equality rights or expression rights. And what the Vuntut Gwitchin First Nation was arguing is that they have their own constitution and they are a fully self-governing entity. They make their own decisions, they make their own laws, and that's because of a right that has existed for them since time immemorial, since before Europeans even made contact with indigenous peoples. And therefore, if you look at Section 25, their view was that the charter doesn't apply at all. And we took issue with that, and many indigenous groups took issue with that, and said that while Section 25 is meant to protect indigenous rights, it's really meant to prevent the charter rights from becoming a sword where other people can use them to sort of fight against these Aboriginal rights that Section 25 protects. And in the view of other people, it's actually, it's more of a shield that they can put up in some cases to protect Aboriginal difference and, the cultural differences of Aboriginal people that they've had in place from time immemorial. And if you look at the judgment, 6 out of 7 judges agreed that no, the charter does apply, and Section 25 exists as a shield in some cases, and I think we'll get into this a bit later, it only exists in those cases where the Aboriginal right being asserted is truly irreconcilable with the charter, the other charter right, which is, equality or expression, things like that.
So one of the things that was interesting, before we get to what the Supreme Court concluded here, Josh, is that the Yukon Court of Appeal actually did find that Section 25 operates to shield Indigenous self-governments from charter scrutiny. Now, what is your take on that? What do you want to add to this finding by the Yukon Court of Appeal that ultimately was in large part repudiated by the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty surprising because when you think of the rights that the charter protects, I think most people assume that they protect all Canadians, that all Canadians are meant to be equal. And if the Yukon Court of Appeals judgment was allowed to stand, what you would see is governments that are have signed on to self-government agreements or otherwise asserted their inherent self-government rights, that there would be large parts of Canada, large swaths of Canada where the charter just doesn't apply to anything the local government is doing, whether it's in northern Quebec or Nunavut, or in this case a smaller part of the Yukon. And we just thought that can't be right. That Section 25 was never meant to create these sort of charter-free zones.
Yeah, Joanna, on the Canadian Constitution Foundation, the charity that all three of us work for, of which you're the executive director, we intervened in this case, and we argued basically what Josh has laid out there. What can you add to what we argued and why we thought this was such an important case to get involved in?
Well, of course, Section 25 is part of the Constitution, and we thought it was really important. Like, the basic principle here is that, yes, we recognize that there are historic, sui generis, customary, otherwise very old laws and practices and rights that that need to be protected even under a constitutional democracy that Indigenous people have. But that doesn't mean that Indigenous governments, which are still governments, have free reign to discriminate against their own people. There should still be a baseline, like a backstop of constitutional protection for every person that lives in Canada. And that was the principle that we intervened to preserve.
Yeah, and that there should not be charter free zones in this country. We've got to go to commercial break, but we will be right back.